found him at dawn on the Deeping Wall, frozen solid, still standing. A king who died with unbent knees, a horn that still echoes through the mountains, and a daughter whose name Tolkien never wrote. This is the real story of Helm Hammerhand. Here's something remarkable about Tolkien's craft. The entire canonical story of Helm Hammerhand exists in just 2.5 pages of Appendix A in The Return of the King. 2.5 pages that Warner Brothers Animation has transformed into a feature-length film. This isn't a full chapter. It's not even a short story. It's a compressed historical entry in the annals of Rohan's kings. The kind of spare, chronicle-style writing you'd find in medieval manuscripts. And yet, within those few paragraphs, Tolkien packed one of the most vivid tales of heroism, vengeance, and metamorphosis in all of Middle-earth. Think about that ratio for a moment. 2.5 pages becoming 2.5 hours. That expansion tells us something crucial. Tolkien's genius wasn't always in exhaustive detail. Sometimes it was in the power of what he left unsaid. The spaces between the words, where imagination takes root. The text appears in a section called The House of Eol, sandwiched between the genealogies of Rohan's kings. You might flip past it while trying to untangle the family trees, but if you slow down and actually read these pages, you encounter one of the most cinematically written passages in all the appendices. A proud king who kills with his bare fists, a 5-month winter siege, night raids where a starving monarch stalks his enemies like a predator, and an ending so iconic it burned itself into Tolkien's world. A man found frozen to death, still standing upright, eyes open, ready to fight. That's the story. That's all Tolkien wrote, and from that kernel, the anime builds an entire universe. Let's trace the exact chain of catastrophe, because what happens to Helm Hammerhand is a masterclass in how personal pride can escalate into national disaster. The year is 2754 of the Third Age. Helm has been King of Rohan for 13 years, ruling from the Golden Hall of Meduseld. He's 53 years old, powerful, respected, and known for his formidable strength. They call him Hammerhand for his prowess in battle, his ability to fight bare-handed and prevail. Into his council comes a man named Freca. Now, Freca is technically a Rohirric lord, but there's complexity here. He's mostly of Dunlendish blood, as the text puts it, descended from the people who inhabited these lands before the Rohirrim arrived 200 years earlier. Freca claims royal ancestry through King Freawyn, but he holds lands near the Adorn River and largely ignores Helm's authority. Freca arrives with many armed men. That's the first provocation. You don't bring an army to a council unless you're making a statement, and he makes his proposal. His son Wulf should marry Helm's daughter. On the surface, a marriage alliance. Beneath it, a play for the throne itself. Freca's trying to insert his bloodline into the royal house, legitimize his mixed Dunlending heritage through marriage to Rohan's princess. Helm sees through it immediately, and instead of diplomatic refusal, he mocks Freca, calls him fat. The insult cuts deep, suggesting Freca has grown soft, lazy, more concerned with feasting than earning respect through strength. Freca fires back. Helm is old. The insults escalate. The council chamber goes silent. And then Helm makes his choice. He takes Freca outside the city. In a field beyond Edoras, Helm strikes Freca with his fist. One punch. Freca dies soon after from the blow. That's the inciting incident. One moment of uncontrolled wrath. And here's where the mathematics of tragedy begin. Helm declares Wulf and all of Freca's kinsmen enemies of the kingdom. They flee to Dunland, welcomed by the wild men who have their own centuries-old grievance against the horse lords who took their lands. 4 years pass. Wulf doesn't forget. Wulf doesn't forgive. In 2758, coordinated by Sauron's agents, stirring up hatred across Middle-earth, a massive invasion hits Rohan. Dunlendings under Wulf, Easterlings, corsairs. The attack comes from multiple directions, timed with simultaneous assaults on Gondor to prevent mutual aid. Helm rides to meet them at the fords of Isen. He's defeated, driven back to the fortress of Hornburg, the ancient Gondorian stronghold in the Gap of Rohan. Meanwhile, Edoras falls. Wulf proclaims himself king in Meduseld, and Helm's elder son, Haleth, dies defending the doors of the Golden Hall. One punch in 2754. 4 years later, Helm's kingdom overrun, his capital occupied, his heir dead, his dynasty collapsing. But the tragedy isn't finished. In November of 2758, as Wulf consolidates power in Edoras and Helm holds out at the fortress now called Hornburg, something unprecedented happens. Winter arrives. Not a normal winter. The long winter, one of the most catastrophic climate events in Middle-earth's recorded history. Great snows from the north and east. The cold reaches from Eriador through Dunland into Rohan. It will last 5 months, nearly half a year of unrelenting ice and starvation. And here's what makes this remarkable. The war doesn't matter anymore. Wulf has conquered the capital. He sits on Helm's throne. He should be able to press his advantage, lay proper siege to Hornburg, starve them out or storm the walls. But he can't. His own forces are starving. The Dunlendings are freezing in their camps. Supply lines are impossible. The same snow that traps Helm inside the fortress traps Wulf's army outside it. The text is explicit about this. Both the Rohirrim and their foes suffered grievously in the cold, and in the dearth that lasted longer. Nature doesn't care who's right. It doesn't care about vengeance, about legitimate grievances, about which side started the cycle of violence. The long winter is an equalizer, an amoral force that suspends human conflict because survival itself becomes the only war that matters. Inside Hornburg, Helm's people are starving. Outside, the Dunlendings are starving. Both sides huddle around dying fires. Both bury their dead in frozen ground. The historical narrative of conquest and resistance gives way to the immediate physical reality of famine. And this is the crucible that changes Helm Hammerhand from king into something else entirely. During the long winter, a new terror emerges in the night around Hornburg, something that stalks the Dunlending camps, something that kills with bare hands and disappears into the snow like a ghost. The Rohirrim call him their king. The Dunlendings call him a snow troll. Helm's younger son, Hammer, rides out from the fortress seeking supplies or reinforcements. He never returns. Now both of Helm's sons are dead, Haleth at Meduseld's doors, Hammer lost to the winter. The first line of Rohan's kings has no heirs. Helm's dynasty is already extinct. He just hasn't died yet. And the text tells us what this loss does to him. Helm grew gaunt because of grief and famine. Gaunt, emaciated, wasting away from starvation and sorrow. You'd think that would make him weaker, more vulnerable. But something else is happening, a metamorphosis through suffering. Helm stops being a king and starts becoming a force of nature. He dresses entirely in white, Camouflage, yes, but also symbolic. He's fusing with the winter landscape, becoming indistinguishable from the snow and ice. And he goes out at night to hunt. The text describes him stalking like a snow troll. This is the only reference to snow trolls in all of Tolkien's work. We don't know if they actually existed or if they're purely folkloric. But the comparison itself tells us what we need to know. Helm has crossed a threshold from human to monstrous. He refuses to carry weapons. The text says, he believed that if he carried no weapon, none could pierce him. This could be delusion, a mind breaking under grief. Or it could be something more, some supernatural quality born of his transformation. The ambiguity is quintessentially Tolkien. You can read this realistically as a man's psychological unraveling, or mythically as a hero transcending mortal limits. Either way, the effect is the same. Helm kills Dunlendings with his bare hands. Those same fists that murdered Freca now murder enemies in the dark. The king who started this war with one punch continues it the same way. Primal, brutal, personal. No sword, no mediation, just flesh against flesh. The dying man becomes more terrifying than the warrior in his prime. Physical weakness, spiritual intensification. Helm's body is failing, but whatever drives him, rage, grief, duty, the refusal to submit, that only grows stronger as he wastes away. He's no longer defending his kingdom in any strategic sense. Rohan is lost. His heirs are dead. This isn't about victory. This is about making them pay for every inch of frozen ground, every hour of the siege, every breath he has left. But Helm has another weapon, one that doesn't require strength or even proximity to kill. The text tells us that Helm possesses a great horn, and he develops a ritual. Before each of his night raids, he ascends to the tower of Hornburg and blows a mighty blast that echoes through the deep gorge below. One note, sustained. Reverberating off the mountain walls, bouncing through the canyon, amplified by the natural acoustics of the landscape. The horn doesn't just announce his raids, it elevates them into something mythic. It's a call of doom. So great a fear fell on his enemies that instead of gathering to take him or kill him, they fled away down the coombe. Think about what this means tactically. Helm is one man, gaunt, starving, in his 60s. The Dunlendings outnumber him massively. They could organize, hunt him in packs, overwhelm him through sheer numbers. But they don't. Because the horn turns Helm into something bigger than one man. It makes him a presence, an inevitability, something that can't be fought. Because fighting requires courage, and the horn strips that away. The horn is Helm's voice, extending beyond his body. It's psychological warfare, refined to pure sound. And here's what makes it profound. The sound outlasts the man. The text says that after Helm's death, the horn was still heard at times in the deep. Whether literal hauntings or the wind through the gorge, creating echoes that sound like that ancient horn, again, Tolkien leaves it ambiguous. What matters is that the sound becomes part of the place itself. The fortress gets renamed, no longer Soothburg, the old Gondorian name meaning South Fortress. Now it's the Hornburg. The gorge, originally called Deeping Coombe, becomes Helm's Deep. Geography itself memorizes the moment. The landscape preserves what flesh cannot. 260 years later, when Theoden King rides to war at Pelennor Fields, he invokes the horn of Helm Hammerhand as he charges to save Gondor. The sound still matters. The legend still inspires. That's Helm's true immortality. Not in children, all dead, or dynasty, extinct, but in the note that continues to echo across centuries. The long winter finally ends in March of 2759. Great floods accompany the thaw, the ice melting, water pouring down from the mountains, washing away the camps and the corpses. And it's in this transitional moment, as winter releases its grip, that someone finds Helm. He's on the dike near Hornburg, the defensive wall overlooking the gorge, and he's dead. But here's the image that crystallizes a historical death into legend. Dead as a stone, but with unbent knees, standing. Frozen, standing up. Not fallen, not collapsed against a wall or slumped in exhaustion. Vertical. Eyes still open. Some versions say this explicitly. The physical impossibility of it suggests supernatural intervention. A body doesn't naturally freeze standing upright unless held there by something beyond biology. And that's precisely the point. Helm's death becomes a message carved in ice. Defiance doesn't end with the heartbeat. In Norse mythology, the gods know they're doomed at Ragnarok, but they fight anyway. That's the theory of courage Tolkien studied and admired from northern literature. Courage not dependent on hope, but on the moral stance of refusing to submit, even when submission is inevitable. Helm embodies this perfectly. His kingdom is lost, his sons are dead, his body is failing. He has no strategic objective, no path to victory, no reason to keep going except the refusal to stop. And even in death, he maintains that refusal. His knees don't bend, his body doesn't fall. The corpse becomes a monument, flesh as symbol, and the symbol does what symbols do. It proliferates, evolves, takes on its own life. The text says, "Men said that the horn was still heard at times in the deep, and the wraith of Helm would walk among the foes of Rohan and kill men with fear." Physical death, spiritual continuation. Helm's transformation completes. He goes from king to snow troll, to frozen sentinel, to wraith. Each stage a shedding of the human until only pure will remains, the indomitable spirit that even death cannot fully extinguish. The Dunlendings must have stared at that standing corpse and understood, you can kill this man, but you cannot make him kneel. And perhaps that broke something in them. Perhaps that's why, when Frealaf, Helm's nephew, launches a surprise attack from Dunharrow that spring, killing Wulf in Meduseld and reclaiming the throne, the Dunlendings collapse so completely. You can't sustain a war when your enemy's death doesn't bring victory, only more fear. But there's someone missing from this story. Someone Tolkien mentioned exactly once and never returned to. Someone whose fate during the 5-month winter siege went completely unrecorded. Helm's daughter. Here's the full extent of her appearance in the canonical text. To one of these councils Freca rode with many men, and he asked the hand of Helm's daughter for his son, Wulf. That's it. She appears as the object of a marriage proposal, a political chess piece in the negotiation that leads to her father killing Freca. And then, silence. The text never mentions her again. We don't know her name. Tolkien never named her. When Christopher Tolkien edited his father's works, he didn't add a name. She remains Helm's daughter, defined entirely by her relationship to a man. We don't know where she was during the war. At Hornburg with her father? At Dunharrow with her cousin Frealaf? In Edoras when it fell, possibly captured? The text doesn't say. We don't know if she survived. The Appendix records Helm's death, his sons' deaths, Frealaf's kingship. Her fate doesn't merit a single line. This is the kind of narrative silence that feminist Tolkien scholarship has spent decades examining. The women who exist in the margins of Middle-earth, mentioned in passing, if at all, their stories deemed less important than the genealogies of male rulers, their agency erased by the very structure of the historical chronicle. And it's worth asking, why? Was she at Hornburg during the siege? If so, what was her experience of those 5 months? Watching her brothers die, her father transform into something inhuman, the fortress slowly starving. Did she flee? Did she fight? Did she mourn? These questions have no answers in Tolkien's text, but they're precisely the questions that the War of the Rohirrim seeks to address. The film names her, Hera, chosen to honor actress Hera Hilmar, who voices the character. And it doesn't just name her, it makes her the protagonist. The entire 2.5-hour narrative centers on her journey, her choices, her heroism. The anime even changes who kills Wulf. In Tolkien's version, Freolaf slays Wulf in Meduseld during the reclamation of Edoras. In the film, Hera kills him, choking him with a shield in single combat, taking personal vengeance for her family. Some fans object to this change. They call it unfaithful to the source material, an injection of modern sensibilities into Tolkien's world. But here's the thing about adapting a 2.5-page appendix entry. Faithfulness to the text means engaging with what the text doesn't say as much as what it does. Tolkien left her unnamed and unrecorded. That gap in the narrative is itself part of the story, a gap shaped by the limitations and biases of chronicle writing, by the medieval sources Tolkien was emulating, by the assumption that a king's daughter matters only insofar as she can be married off for political alliance. The anime looks at that gap and asks, what if we filled it? Not to contradict Tolkien, but to explore the story that his own narrative structure suppressed. What would Helm's daughter say if given voice? What was her war like? We'll find out on December 13th. And regardless of how you feel about adaptation choices, this much is true. The War of the Rohirrim is doing what all good adaptations do. It's taking the kernel Tolkien planted and asking what grows from it. 2.5 pages, 2.5 hours. The real story of Helm Hammerhand is both the stark power of Tolkien's compressed legend and the expansive possibilities of what he left unsaid. One doesn't replace the other. They coexist, each illuminating what the other can't quite reach. And in that space between text and adaptation, between chronicle and imagination, we find one of the most haunting stories in all of Rohan's history. The king who died standing, the horn that still echoes, and the daughter whose story is finally being told. And so we see how Tolkien's most powerful stories are sometimes his shortest. 2.5 pages that contain a king's transformation from man to myth, a horn that outlives the warrior who blew it, and a daughter whose silence speaks louder than any chronicle. The real story of Helm Hammerhand lives in both the text and the spaces between words, in what Tolkien carved into legend and what he left for us to imagine. If you enjoyed this exploration of Rohan's darkest hour, please hit that like button and subscribe to Ranger of the Realms for more deep dives into Middle-earth's untold stories. And let me know in the comments, will you be seeing The War of the Rohirrim when it releases? Until next time, may you stand unbowed when winter comes.